2 MVP awards and 0 Super Bowl appearances. That's the reality of the Lamar Jackson era in Baltimore. The Ravens managed to build what looked like a dynasty on 2 separate occasions, first with one of the most explosive offenses the NFL had ever seen, and later with the top-ranked defense backing a quarterback who had evolved into a completely different animal. Both of those runs ended in total collapse before they could even reach the finish line. You have to wonder if the blame should go to Lamar, the coaching staff, or just terrible luck at the worst possible moments. The reality is all 3 of those play a specific part, and year by year, we're going to be going over exactly whose fault it was. But everything starts with Ozzie Newsome, who constructed 2 Super Bowl rosters in Baltimore and is one of the best GMs in the history of the NFL. By the time the 2018 draft rolled around, Newsome had already announced this would be his final year before handing the reins to Eric DeCosta. He had 1 draft left to leave his mark, and he clearly wasn't planning to waste the opportunity. Baltimore held the 16th overall pick heading into that draft, but Newsome decided to trade back twice until he landed at 25, while picking up extra assets along the way. The team used those picks to select tight end Hayden Hurst, followed by Oklahoma products Orlando Brown Jr. and Mark Andrews in the 3rd round. While that was already shaping up to be a very productive weekend, Newsome wasn't finished making moves yet. The Ravens were watching closely late in the 1st round. Baltimore called Philly to trade 2 second-round picks and a 4th just to jump back into the 1st round, and they used that 32nd overall pick to grab Lamar Jackson out of Louisville. This was a Heisman winner who had spent months listening to critics tell him to switch positions, and he had nearly fallen out of the 1st round entirely before the Ravens stopped the slide. Ozzie pulled off one final heist, then he stepped back and handed the keys to Eric DeCosta. While Eric is a highly capable executive, the drafting standard Newsome established was generational, leaving the new GM with massive shoes to fill, and he hasn't really lived up to it. Lamar didn't actually start right away in 2018 because Joe Flacco was still the guy under center. The season started poorly with the Ravens going 4-5, and after 3 straight losses, people were openly questioning if John Harbaugh should keep his job. Even the owner Steve Bisciotti later admitted that firing the coach was a real consideration at the time. Everything changed when Flacco got hurt, allowing Lamar to take over in Week 11 and lead the team to 6 wins in their final 7 games. That run secured the AFC North title, saved Harbaugh's career, and gave the entire fan base a reason to believe again. However, the 2018 wildcard game against the Chargers served as a harsh reminder of the growing pains that comes with a rookie quarterback. Lamar struggled through a 14-29 performance for less than 200 yards, and the offense looked lost while he turned the ball over 4 times. The home crowd was actually calling for Flacco to come in at halftime. The Ravens were trailing 23-3 in the 4th quarter, and Harbaugh decided to stick with his rookie. While Baltimore scored 2 late touchdowns to make it close, they still lost 23-17. After the game, Lamar admitted he played poorly, showing the kind of accountability that would eventually define his leadership. Harbaugh doubled down on his quarterback despite the playoff. There's no real logical way to describe what Lamar Jackson did in 2019, except to say that the NFL had never seen a QB do what he did. He led the league with 36 touchdown passes while simultaneously rushing for 1,206 yards, which officially broke the single-season quarterback record previously held by Michael Vick. The numbers were just staggering across the board as he posted a 113.3 passer rating and led the Ravens to a 14-2 record. Baltimore earned the top seed in the AFC and set the all-time single-season rushing record as a team, while the offense hummed along at a pace of 33 points per game. Because of that dominance, Lamar became only the 2nd player in the history of the NFL to win the MVP award unanimously, by taking all 50 votes, just following Tom Brady in 2010. The Ravens looked completely unstoppable as they beat the Patriots and the 49ers during a winning streak that stretched from September all the way to the end of the year. Their roster finished with the highest scoring differential in the league, and the games showed they were statistically one of the most dominant groups in the modern era of football. After resting their starters in Week 17 and taking a 1st-round bye, they sat at home waiting for a Tennessee Titans team that had just scraped into the playoffs as a 9-7 6th seed. What happened next became the defining image of the Lamar Jackson era for years to come, and it started when the Titans jumped out to a 14-0 lead that Baltimore never recovered from. Derrick Henry ran for 195 yards and controlled the entire tempo of the game, which forced the Ravens to abandon the identity that made them so dangerous in the first place. Greg Roman stopped running the ball altogether and called 39 passes in the 2nd half alone, effectively putting Lamar in the drop-back role he wasn't ready to handle at that stage of his career yet. By the time the clock hit 0, Lamar had finished 31 of 59 for 365 yards with 2 interceptions and a costly fumble. His passer rating plummeted to 63.2, and the final score of 28-12 sent the best team in football home early. Now you had to put some of this on Lamar because he was missing open throws and couldn't find a way to make a play when the game started slipping away. But the coaching staff also failed them by refusing to adjust the scheme as the game went on. Tennessee had a very specific plan to force Lamar into the pocket and take away the middle of the field, yet Baltimore kept calling passing plays into a defense that was practically begging them to run. The playoff choker narrative really picked up there and has followed the organization around like a shadow ever since. While the Chargers' loss in 2018 felt like growing pains, blowing a 14-2 season as a top seed with a unanimous MVP was a much harder pill for fans to swallow. The story gets a lot more complicated from here because the 2020 season actually started off like the perfect redemption story for the franchise. Baltimore drew a rematch with the Titans in the wildcard round, and this time Lamar didn't have to rely solely on his arm to get the job done. He rushed for 163 yards while the defense completely neutralized Derrick Henry, which gave Lamar the first postseason win of his career and seemed to shift the conversation around his legacy for a bit. However, they traveled to Buffalo the following week and things fell apart even faster than they had in previous years. The turning point came in the third quarter when Lamar threw a pass toward the end zone that Teron Johnson intercepted and returned 101 yards for a touchdown. That play effectively ended the game, and the final score of 17-3 left the Ravens searching for answers once again. Lamar finished with a passer rating of 68.1 and was forced to leave the game with a concussion in the third quarter. After back-to-back years of dominant regular seasons, the Ravens had suffered back-to-back early exits, leaving Lamar with a 1-3 postseason record. The situation went from bad to worse as the injury years began to take a toll on the roster and the win column. During the 2021 season, Lamar missed a significant amount of time with an ankle injury, and the Ravens finished 8-9 to miss the playoffs for the first time since 2017. History repeated itself in 2022 when Lamar went down late in the year with a knee injury, though the team was talented enough to make the postseason without him. They played Cincinnati in the wildcard game but lost after Tyler Huntley fumbled on the goal line, which brought another promising season to a disappointing end. But while the results on the field were frustrating, the front office was quietly building a foundation that would change the trajectory of the defense. Before the 2022 season kicked off, Eric DeCosta made the bold move to hire Mike Macdonald as the new defensive coordinator. Macdonald was only 34 years old and had never coordinated at the NFL level before, but the organization believed in the work he had done at the University in Michigan. That turned out to be one of the best hires of the decade because Macdonald immediately installed a system that was aggressive, physically dominant, and incredibly difficult for opposing quarterbacks to read. The Ravens would go on to draft Swiss Army knife Kyle Hamilton in the first round of the 2022 draft as well, and the final piece of the puzzle arrived at the 2022 trade deadline when DeCosta sent a second and fifth round pick to Chicago for Roquan Smith. Smith was arguably the best linebacker in football in Chicago and had been vocal about wanting a trade, so the Ravens swooped in and secured him before anyone else could. The impact was felt within a few days of his arrival because his leadership and range allowed the rest of the unit to play faster. When you pair the Macdonald scheme with a centerpiece like Roquan Smith and a young star like Kyle Hamilton, you start to see the shape of a truly special defense. Even though they didn't have Lamar healthy for the end of the 2022 season, the roster was finally starting to look complete as they headed into the next chapter. The offseason heading into 2023 was so chaotic that it could have derailed the entire franchise. Back in March, Lamar Jackson had took to social media and had said that he requested a trade from the Ravens because they weren't meeting his value. It was a public standoff that felt like the end of an era, yet surprisingly no other team made a serious run at him. The Raiders and Panthers made some mild noise before backing off, and even after Baltimore put the non-exclusive franchise tag on him, nobody stepped up with an offer sheet. It felt like collusion. Eric DeCosta eventually ended the drama by signing Lamar to a 5-year, $260 million deal just hours before the draft started, which was the biggest contract in NFL history at that moment. Right around the same time this contract saga was unfolding, Greg Roman resigned as the offensive coordinator. Roman had been with Lamar since the very beginning and built the famous run-heavy scheme, but the Ravens decided they wanted a different version of their quarterback. They went out and hired Todd Monken, who was coming off back-to-back national championships at Georgia, and he immediately shifted the entire philosophy. Monken installed more passing concepts and spread formations, which allowed Lamar to operate as a traditional pocket passer who just happened to be the most dangerous rusher on the planet. The results were insane immediately. The 2023 regular season was the closest thing to complete Baltimore Ravens football we have seen in this entire era. Lamar secured his second MVP trophy while leading the team to a 13-4 record and the top seed in the AFC. The defense was even more dominant, finishing first in the league by just allowing 16.5 points per game. They actually became the first team in NFL history to lead the league in fewest points allowed, most sacks, and most takeaways in the same season. Having Roquan Smith and Kyle Hamilton as all-pros meant Mike Macdonald had this unit playing at a level you rarely see. The divisional round against Houston was not exactly a masterpiece, but in the playoffs you just need the win. Lamar struggled badly in the first half because the Texans were blitzing him on almost every single snap, and he was visibly furious when he stormed off the field at halftime. The Ravens made the necessary adjustments during the break, the defense shut the door in the second half, and Baltimore walked away with a 34-10 victory. Then came the AFC Championship at home against Kansas City, which was the first time Baltimore had hosted a conference title game since 1971, back when they were the Baltimore Colts. The Ravens entered the game as favorites, the energy in the city was electric, and then they lost 17-10 in one of the most deflating games of this entire era. It was a total gut punch for a fan base that felt like it was finally their year. Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs came out swinging with a touchdown on their opening possession to Travis Kelce. Lamar and company answered with an insane throw to Zay Flowers for a touchdown, but then things went quiet. Baltimore spent the rest of the afternoon desperately playing catch-up. The Ravens' offense completely stalled out in the middle of the game, gaining just 69 total yards across 6 straight possessions. Lamar finished 20 of 37 for 272 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 costly interception. That pick was a forced throw into triple coverage into the end zone late in the fourth quarter, and with the team trailing late, that mistake falls squarely on his shoulders. Earlier in the game, Zay Flowers caught a 54-yard pass down inside the 10-yard line, but he taunted the defender, drew a 15-yard penalty, and then got the ball punched a few plays later, diving for the end zone. With 2 MVPs and 0 wins in his only conference championship appearance, the choke artist conversation went from a whisper to a roar, and the Ravens didn't have much of an answer. After the loss in the AFC Championship game, the Ravens had a massive decision to make for their defense moving forward. Mike Macdonald had built a genuinely elite unit over 2 seasons, but the Seattle Seahawks came calling and hired him as their head coach. Baltimore couldn't do much to stop it because for some reason they didn't want to fire John Harbaugh, so DeCosta turned to Zach Orr, a former Ravens linebacker who knew the culture and had trust in the organization. The problem was that Orr had never coordinated a defense at any professional level, and that gap between him and Macdonald was not just a theory. It showed up on the scoreboard almost every single week as the defense struggled to find its footing. The offense, however, was playing at a level that defied logic. Lamar Jackson put together what might be the best statistical season a quarterback has ever had in 2024. He threw for 4,172 yards and 41 touchdowns with only 4 interceptions, while adding 915 yards on the ground. He became the first player in NFL history to hit 4,000 passing yards and 800 rushing yards in the same season. His passer rating sat at 119.6, which is the 4th highest in the history of the NFL, and he consistently put up massive numbers through the air and on the ground in the same game. Derrick Henry was a massive part of this historic production. Baltimore signed him in free agency, and he responded by running for 1,921 yards and 16 touchdowns, which broke Jamal Lewis's single-season franchise record. The combination of Lamar and Henry created the most physically punishing backfield in the league because defenses simply couldn't account for both of them at the same time. The offense finished as the best in the NFL by a wide margin, but the defense was giving up points so fast that Baltimore spent most of the year fighting just to stay relevant in the division. They finished 12-5, which was good enough for a wildcard spot, and they handled the Steelers easily in the opening round. The divisional round in Buffalo was a tale of 2 completely different halves of football. During the first half, Lamar threw an interception and lost a fumble, which allowed the Bills to jump out to a 21-10 lead. It looked exactly like every other time this team had shown up flat in January, and you could almost feel the national narrative forming in real time as the Buffalo crowd got louder. That was when Lamar decided to take over the game. He started carving them up in the intermediate passing game, the chains started moving, and Baltimore slowly clawed their way back to the contest. They scored a touchdown to make it 27-25 with about 90 seconds left on the clock. They went for 2 and Lamar dropped back to find Mark Andrews hitting the out route. He put the ball right on the money and Andrews just dropped it. It was a clean throw and a relatively easy play for a guy of his caliber, but the ball hit the turf and the season was over. There's plenty of blame to go around for how this game ended. The defense gave up 27 points to a Buffalo offense that had lost Stephon Diggs, which really highlighted the drop-off from Macdonald to Orr. Earlier in that same game, Mark Andrews had the ball punch out for a fumble that gave the Bills great field position and an eventual cushion. Those are the kind of drive killers that have nothing to do with the quarterback. It was a brutal way to end the most statistically dominant season we had ever seen from him. Lamar finished 2024 as the runner-up in MVP voting, despite having better numbers than the actual winner in Josh Allen. He played the second half of the Bills game at an incredibly high level, but he also had those early turnovers that put the team in a hole. The record books will show another playoff loss, but the full picture shows a team that needed its defense to hold on, and it didn't, and needed its star tight end to make a play, and he couldn't. The 2025 season starts off on the wrong foot and only gets worse from there. During week 1, the Ravens host the Bills, which is the same team that knocked them out of the playoffs the year before, and they ended up blowing a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter. Buffalo walks away with the win because the defense couldn't find a way to get a stop when it mattered the most, and the offense failed to milk the clock to protect the lead, which felt like a bad omen for the rest of the year. September and October actually looked great for Lamar Jackson on an individual level, and he started the season with one of the most efficient stretches of his entire career. He put up numbers through those first 4 weeks that honestly had no competition or no comparison in league history, making the Ravens look even more dangerous than they were in 2024. The momentum stops when the injuries start to pile up, forcing Lamar to miss time and causing the offense to lose its rhythm entirely. Zach Orr's defense stays consistently bad during this entire stretch, looking like a unit that can't even hold a bad team to under 20 points. Baltimore spends the entire second half of the year grinding just to stay alive in the AFC North race. Everything comes down to week 18 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, where the Ravens need a win just to sneak into the postseason. This is where the era officially ends, and it happens in one of the most heartbreaking ways possible for this franchise. Baltimore is trailing late in the game when Lamar decides to take over, throwing 2 long touchdown passes to Zay Flowers to put them ahead. But a Zach Orr-led defense can't get a stop against 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers, and so the Steelers take the lead once more, eventually leading to a huge 4th down play where Lamar hits Isaiah Likely to get into field goal range. All that was left was for the kicker to nail a 44-yard field goal to seal the deal. Tyro Loop was a rookie kicker the Ravens drafted in 2025 specifically because they needed a plan for life after Justin Tucker, but he missed the kick. The game ends right there, the season is over, and the Ravens missed the playoffs for the first time since 2021. The fallout from that miss happens fast, starting with John Harbaugh being fired after 18 seasons with the organization. He won a Super Bowl back in 2012 and built a culture that stayed competitive through 3 different eras, leaving the team with 193 wins, which is the most in franchise history. The reality is that in 8 seasons with Lamar, he only won 3 playoff games and never made it back to the Super Bowl, so the front office decides a total reset is necessary. Zach Orr is let go along with them, and Todd Monken leaves to take the head coaching job with the Cleveland Browns. To start a new chapter, Baltimore hires Jesse Minter, who had been running the defense in LA with the Chargers. When you look back at what this era actually left behind, the resume shows 2 MVPs and 3 playoff wins but 0 trips to the Super Bowl. A 3-5 record in the postseason is a tough pill to swallow for a fan base that watched the most dynamic player of a generation come up empty in the biggest moments. Every single one of those big-time losses has a different primary cause, and while some of it falls on Lamar, most of the blame is shared across the roster. This era didn't fail just because one person wasn't good enough to win it all. It failed because the team could never get every single piece of the puzzle lined up at the exact moment when it actually mattered. Greatness is never a guarantee of a championship, and this Ravens era proved it. I still think Lamar & Company is going to win one, but I guess we'll see. So there you have it. Subscribe if you're new, and watch this next video if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.